Hi everyone, and welcome to StudioJake Comics, Cartoons, and Coffee, where we talk all things comic books, cartoons, all while enjoying a nice cup. Today I've got cold brew. It's really cold. Kind of musky taste. Anyway, welcome to the show. Today I want to talk about a cartoon. Yay! And it's one that is a big subject of controversy, especially for Star Trek fans, whether you're a Trekker or a Trekkie. Spoiler alert, there's no difference between the two. It's just an argument among fans. As you know, I always like to bring messages of hope and inspiration for fandoms all over the place. With Star Trek, I cannot. I bear tidings of sadness, and this is really hard for me to talk about. I want you to know the emotional toll it's taking on me to discuss Star Trek Lower Decks. That's right, I am talking about the animated series produced by Alex Kurtzman as his reign of terror continues at CBS Paramount, and McMahon, who is the showrunner. I believe his full name is Mark McMahon. Let me know if I'm wrong about that in the comments. But I wanted to talk about the show because it's made to be sort of a self-parody of all things Star Trek. So what is Star Trek about for just some of you normies who might be watching? You're like, what's the big deal? It's just Star Trek. Well, Star Trek, of course, started with the original series. Then years later, in the late 80s, early 90s, came the Next Generation, which spun off a whole host of other shows, including Deep Space Nine, Voyager. Star Trek Enterprise was a prequel to the original series. And now, of course, in modern times, we have Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, and Star Trek Lower Decks. Now, I've discussed Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard on my website, StudioJakeMedia.com, so you can head over there and read my thoughts of those. Just search Star Trek in the search bar and they come up. Now, Lower Decks, I've actually been hesitant to talk about because this is something I kind of wanted to give a chance. Because when it comes to parodying yourself, it actually can be a lot of fun. So what is a parody? A parody is where you take something, an established idea or intellectual property, and you take the rules of that universe and use those rules to flip the premise on its head, or things that happen in a show or a book or a comic book, and you kind of turn it on itself and for the sake of making jokes and maybe even kind of being self-deprecating during it. And there are some good examples of companies that have successfully parodied themselves and then not so successfully. So for instance, DC Comics. No lie, Batman is their biggest intellectual property. People tell you that it's Superman are lying. They have successfully parodied the Batman universe twice. One with an animated show that came out in the early 2010s, I think, called Batman the Brave and the Bold, which took the idea of Batman and him working with the Justice League, and they took a lot of cues from the 60s Batman with Adam West, and they kind of melded it together and made kind of a funny show where they made fun of the characters, but they used the characters' quirks and exaggerated them. They used the Batman premise and kind of made fun of it, made it lighthearted, made it a little funny. So it's, stuff like that. And of course they do that with the Harley Quinn animated series, right? It's Harley Quinn, and they're making fun of things like the Legion of Doom and Batman and Superman. And they do this well. They take the universe and the quirks of the universe and exaggerate them and make them funny. Now, this has also been a massive fail. For instance, Thundercat fans know Thundercats Roar, where they took the Thundercats characters and drew them kind of in that chibi sort of fake anime style, and put in a lot of, scatological humor, and it had really nothing to do with Thundercats. And same thing with the Netflix remake of She-Ra, Princess of Power. They took this extraordinarily strong Wonder Woman-like character and made her this teenage prom queen, and it was just a failure of a parody on every level.
I think they meant that one to be serious.
What? So anyway, we're talking about Star Trek Lower Decks, and I hate to say it, but Star Trek Lower Decks kind of takes the parody and parodies itself because it's not really a show about Star Trek. It's a show that's supposed to be in the setting of Star Trek, and it has some of the similar premises and aliens, but they are not in like a Star Trek universe. For one thing, Star Trek is about Starfleet. It's an organization that is run like a military, but they're explorers. What this show does is it takes the explorer premise on the show called the Cerritos, and it's Doomcock, who's another YouTuber. That's his real name, or his real YouTuber name. He calls it the Cheetos instead of the Cerritos. And the whole premise is they instead of establishing first contact, their job is to come up and establish second contact. And the main characters are these ensigns who are on the lower decks, hence the name Lower Decks. And this is where the show could have been successful. And I really feel sorry for the animators and even the voice actors who work on this show, because you can just tell that the creators of the show had never seen Star Trek. In fact, there's even a rumor that Kurtzman, who is in charge of Star Trek right now, that he fires people who say, I love the franchise. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that is kind of what is coming down the pipeline, because he wants new and fresh voices who actually don't know what they're talking about. And in this show, instead of taking things that happen on a Federation ship and parodying them and finding the quirkiness of them, things happen on the ship that should not happen, and they're trying to spin it off as it's really funny. But it fails on every level. The main character is this ensign named Mariner, and she has this, I don't know how else to say it, she has a god complex. So she used to be a lieutenant, a high-ranking senior officer, and she got demoted, and she's stuck on the ship where her captain is the mom, and her dad is an admiral. And she is a screw-up on every level. She insults people. She has her sleeves rolls up. She shows cleavage all the time. This would not be tolerated on a ship, especially on a starship where you're supposed to be professional and businesslike, and especially since you're making contact with other aliens. And it's very confusing why this go on. Now, they kind of make it a big deal that her parents are high-ranking Starfleet officers, so she has some nepotism going for her. Well, in the first episode, there's a scene where, because she's friends with this other ensign who is like kind of a straight-laced Starfleet officer. I don't remember his name, but he has purple hair, so I'm just going to call him Ensign Purple Hair. Ensign Purple Hair, he's the straight-laced kind of Starfleet officer who always follows the rules, always gets his work done on time, and he is the constant target of Mariner's torture through the whole show. Even though he wants to be a captain one day, he wants to be a Starfleet officer, she is constantly mocking him, she's constantly making fun of him. And you really feel bad for Ensign Purple Hair. The first scene of the show, she gets drunk on Romulan whiskey in the very first episode. And see, right off the bat, you can tell the writers don't know what they're talking about. Romulans don't brew whiskey, they brew ale. They could have made like that into a joke about how the Romulans, they only make ale, I don't get why they don't make whiskey. You know, that could have been a really funny aside, but instead they can't even name the correct liquor. That doesn't even make any sense. So as she's drunk, she stabs him and cuts off a part of his leg with a Klingon batleth as she's drunk, and they both scream. Welcome to Star Trek Lower Decks. That's literally the opening of the show. And I'm like, I'm supposed to laugh because she chopped off a chunk of his leg? And that, my friends, is the beginning of the show. So I'm halfway through the season. As of the recording of this, I have not watched episode 6. I'm at episode 5. And it just gets worse and worse and worse from there. There is no humor. They introduce 2 other ensigns. One is a nurse. One is an engineering officer. And I don't even know why they're there. What Lower Decks does is they have like these parallel story arcs with Mariner and Ensign Purple Hair, and then the engineering ensign and the nurse. And the engineering and the nurse story arcs have no meaning at all. Theirs are the least funny. In fact, one of the episodes, the engineering officer, the nurse wants him to watch some sort of eclipse or something from the deck, but he can't do it because the engineering schedule. So he agrees to transfer to a different department. And so the whole half of this episode, it shows him like reacting to every scenario. So one of the departments he transfers to is the security department. And one of the things is he's a cyborg. He's kind of a wannabe Geordie LaForge from Next Generation. And part of the hologram is he has to fight Borg. Now, anyone familiar with Star Trek know that the Borg is Starfleet's most vicious adversary. They're a race of cybernetic beings that use nanites to conquer other races. They're one of the biggest enemies in Star Trek Voyager. One of the things about them is they adapt. So you kill them one way, then the next Borg adapts, and you can't kill the Borgs the same way twice. It's like a recurring theme, is they're always trying to come up with innovative ways to defeat the Borg. So what ends up happening is he just karate chops them all. And now, granted, it's on the holodeck, but the security officer, he's like kind of this Worf wannabe, but he's Bajoran instead of Klingon. He puts it on the most lethal setting. And so this cyborg dude is able to beat all these Borgs with just his fists and like a torn off pipe. And it's meant to be funny, but you don't laugh because you go, that would never happen in a Borg scenario. What would have been funnier is if he had found some comedic way to kill them all at once so they don't have a chance to adapt. That would have been funnier, and my wife even laughed at that joke because, yes, it's way funnier than how the joke was set up in the show. One of the things that I especially don't like about the show is one of the things Gene Roddenberry was kind of a big voice of is he wants to show that there's hope for humanity. Because when Star Trek was first coming out, it was at a time in the world's history where the Cold War was happening and we didn't know if we were all going to die in this nuclear holocaust. And so Captain Kirk and his crew was meant to be hope. There's hope for humanity. We can be better. We can go beyond the stars, and we can find perhaps these aliens and whatnot. This show outright mocks that. It's saying, no, humanity hasn't gotten better. We're still exactly the same pieces of garbage in the 23rd century that we are in the 19th, 28th, and 21st centuries. And I just think that is abhorrent. That idea that the creators of the show would take such a great concept and instead of kind of poking fun at the quirks, like maybe they had a captain who was kind of like Kirk. Kirk was kind of an ideal Starfleet officer, but he was also kind of a rogue. It would have been great if maybe they had had a captain who was kind of this roguish guy who was always getting in trouble, but instead we have Mariner's mother as the captain, and she is a grouch. You do not like this woman. In fact, I remember there's an episode, I believe this was the pilot episode, where the crew gets infected by this alien virus that turns them all as zombies, and I was actually rooting for the zombie virus. I was like, I hope the show just ends with this situation, that it just happens this way. That would be way better than what I have seen in the last 20 minutes of my life. And it's the same with every single episode. There's an episode where they make contact, Starfleet makes contact with this alien race that worship diamonds. Now, in Starfleet, a lot of the alien races have different religions where they worship, various deities and whatnot. That in and of itself is not unusual. However, this alien race, they are not advanced. In Starfleet, you don't make contact with an alien race unless they have achieved warp drive, that, the speed of light for space flight. That is the only time you make contact with them, and then they also, before they can even be in Starfleet, they have to be a certain amount of advance. Otherwise, they just kind of go into a trade situation with Starfleet. Not the case with this show. They'll take any crappy alien race that comes along, no matter how awful they are. Because in this episode, they have trial by combat, and that's how they determine who's guilty or innocent. And they're going to do this with the Starfleet officers. They're going to put them in a trial by combat, and if they kill the champion of the alien race, then they're going to let the Cerritos go and all this. It wasn't even funny. Like with the other stuff, I could at least write a better joke. I can't write a better joke with this because it's just such nonsense. It makes no sense. And one of Anna, that Star Wars girl, her channel does a really good job. She breaks down, if you want to see episode breakdowns, she does a good job of breaking each one about how the crew breaks Starfleet protocol, and not just these lower deck kind of rebel characters, how the Starfleet officers on the ship actually break protocol to accomplish these kinds of just antics. The only funny part where I actually laughed out loud was Mariner and the first officer of the ship, who is a completely forgettable character. I can't even remember his name, but the first officer, they're in this jail cell together, and they're about to go fight the aliens for their innocence and whatnot. And the first officer does this big speech about how Starfleet values will get us through. And she goes, "No, sometimes you have to break the rules." So he stabs her in the foot. And so he can fight the alien and not her, which I actually laughed out loud because I was like, "Ha! Finally, someone put that." I almost said a bad word. Anyway, someone finally put her in her place, because it was a long time coming, and I thought that was the only part of 5 episodes of a alleged comedy where I laughed out loud. Just one scene out of, let's see, they're 25 minutes. So there's 5 episodes. Gee whiz, that's 125 minutes. And I laughed out loud at one 10-second gag. Wow. That's embarrassing. Also on this, I would like to say, this really shows what's happening with these fandoms. We see this happening at Marvel. We see this happening at DC Comics with Star Wars, and it's happening big time at Star Trek. And I've done a ton of commentary on those other franchises. With Star Trek specifically, they really need to do a course correction. My understanding is the reason they can't get rid of Kurtzman, and I hate to lay it all at one man's feet, but he puts his name on all of these dang shows, so he is going to take the heat. I really feel like they need to get rid of Kurtzman. They need to find a new person to head up Star Trek. My understanding is it's a situation where Paramount and CBS, they had split, and Paramount had the movie rights to Star Trek, and CBS had the television rights. And so some point, Kurtzman got a contract, and they have to let his contract play out. They can't just fire him. And that's a shame. And Disney, I guess, is doing the same thing with Kathleen Kennedy. They want to put in this young blood, which is fine. You need newer voices. You need those kinds of new voices, but you need them to carry your franchise into the next generation. What made Star Trek endure was the fans. Whenever the next generation became a sequel to the original series was still going on in movies. They did 6 movies with the original crew. That's amazing. They were one of the first, I believe, television series that only lasted 3 seasons that got movie spin-offs like that. That's how beloved this show was. And then the same thing with The Next Generation, with Voyager, with Deep Space Nine. And even though Star Trek Enterprise, it's kind of unappreciated in regards to the franchise, none of those shows mocked what Star Trek was about, mocked kind of the principles of Starfleet. This show does not parody, it mocks. The only people laughing at it are people who are already laughing at Star Trek and Star Trek fans. You know, I hate to say that. Everyone kind of thinks that Star Trek is sort of this nerd thing, this niche thing. Next Generation, Voyager, and Deep Space Nine all ran for 7 seasons. Okay, that's a long time for a show to run. They were popular, not just among Star Trek fans, they were popular among just general TV audiences. And maybe they weren't invested like, say, I, as a nerd, am in the show. But the audiences know when they're being mocked, know when they're being made fun of. And that is what is happening with Star Trek Lower Decks. So I really hope that CBS will make a course correction. They're not to the point of Star Wars. Disney owning Star Wars. Disney itself just needs an overhaul. I mean, when you're to the point where you're thanking the Chinese Communist Party for letting you film on location in China, yeah, you need an overhaul. You need a whole new staff. I hope Bob Chapek, or whatever his name is, fires the entire Disney staff and just starts over from scratch. Maybe bring Don Bluth back. I don't know. But with CBS, like I said, I hate to put all the blame on Alex Kurtzman, but he puts his name on all these shows. Discovery had so much potential. And to be fair, I kind of gave Discovery the benefit of the doubt. And even in my reviews, you can see that I give it the benefit of the doubt. But it's not as good compared to the original series or Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine. Now, I still hold to my contention that as far as politically correct goes, Deep Space Nine is still more politically correct than Discovery is, and even Picard. But still, the sort of dark Star Trek. No one asked for it. No one wanted it. So why give it to us? Give us the things we want. We want to be appreciated as fans. We want that Star Trek with Gene Roddenberry's ideals, that we can be optimistic about the future, that we can move forward in time and come together as humanity to better ourselves. That's a really fantastic ideal, and the fact that Lower Decks mocks that idea openly is an embarrassment to Star Trek. So that's all the time I have for today. Thank you so much for watching. Again, be sure to subscribe to StudioJake, like this video, comment below. It helps with the algorithm. Also, ring that little bell. That way you get notifications whenever I post a new video. If you're on Facebook, also give this a like, and give my Facebook page, Author Jacob Airy, a like. Follow it so you get more information. Check out my website, StudioJakeMedia.com. You can find me on all the social medias. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Parler as Real Jacob Airy, or at Real Jacob Airy if you're in the techno like I am. And also, thank you so much for watching. And a lot of times people end with kind of a bad note, but when it comes to Star Wars or Star Trek, but I'm just going to close out with this. Live long and prosper, and I'll see you next time right here on Studio Jake.